everyone loves you, but absolutely no one knows you. Because the person they love is just a survival mask you put on so they wouldn't abandon you. Someone asks where you want to eat, and your mind just goes blank. You scan the table first, waiting to hear what everyone else wants before you can find what you want. You laugh a half-second after the room laughs. You go warm with the warm ones, sharp with the sharp ones, small with the loud ones, an emotional chameleon, a different person in every doorway. They call it being easygoing. You call it surviving. But here's the part nobody warns you about. You didn't choose this. You were trained for it. If your chest tightened a little just now, stay with me. And maybe go ahead and subscribe. Because what we're about to name is something most people perform their entire lives without ever once catching themselves doing it. Because somewhere back there, being fully yourself stopped feeling safe, and pleasing quietly became the price of staying loved. So let's go back and find the room where you first learned to disappear. Who are you when you're not trying to please people? The emotional chameleon. Let's start with what it actually feels like from the inside. You walk into a room and, before you even sit down, some quiet system in you boots up, scanning faces, measuring the temperature, reading the room for what version of you is needed here. With this group, you're funny. With that one, you're calm. The shape-shifting is so fast you don't notice it anymore. People praise your adaptability. They have no idea it's a survival skill wearing a smile. Here's the strange part. If someone stopped you mid-conversation and asked plainly, "What do you actually want right now?" you'd freeze. Not because you're indecisive, because the question feels almost foreign, like it's pointed at a person who isn't there. You know exactly what everyone else at the table wants. You clocked it the moment you walked in. But your own preference, it went quiet a long time ago, somewhere you can't quite remember. And that's silence. That's not a personality. That's a clue. But this didn't start with you. To understand it, we have to go back to a house, a kitchen, a younger version of you no taller than the counter. Picture that child for a second. Watch them come through the front door after school, and watch what they do before saying a single word. They pause. They listen for the sound of the house. Is it a safe day or a careful one? Because somewhere in there, a small person learned to check the weather before they spoke. That checking, that's where the hypervigilance was born. Not as a flaw, but as a brilliant adaptation. A child can't leave. A child can't fix the adult. So the nervous system does the only thing it can. It gets good at reading faces, at catching the shift in a parent's tone before the words even land. That's not weakness. That's a tiny survival genius keeping itself safe. The problem is, nobody told that system the danger was over. So it kept scanning. For years. Fast forward to now. That scanning grew up with you, and it wears nicer clothes. It's the apology that leaves your mouth before anyone's even upset. It's saying yes when you mean no, then quietly resenting yourself for it. It's the way you go soft and accommodating the instant someone's mood darkens, smoothing, soothing, managing. Psychologists have a name for this. The fawn response. When fight, flight, and freeze aren't options, a child learns a fourth one. Please the threat, and maybe it won't become one. Go back again, just for a moment. There's a scene a lot of these kids share. A child runs in, lit up, holding something, a drawing, a grade, a small triumph, and the adult barely looks up. Or worse, the warmth only arrives when the child is useful, quiet, easy, good. Love showed up on a schedule the child couldn't control. So the child drew a conclusion, fast and silent. I am loved when I please. This is what conditional love teaches. Affection has a price. And here's the quiet tragedy in it. To keep earning that love, the child had to make a trade. Every time they sensed a parent's preference, they set their own aside. Every time they read disappointment, they adjusted, shrinking to fit in, going along, becoming whatever kept the connection alive. We call that self-abandonment, and it's the engine underneath the whole pattern. The child wasn't being fake. The child was choosing connection over self, because for a child, connection is survival. Self came second, by necessity. There's a famous experiment that captures this better than words. In 1975, a developmental psychologist named Edward Tronick ran what's now called the still face experiment. A mother plays warmly with her baby, fully engaged, then, on cue, she goes blank, flat, unresponsive. Within seconds, the baby strains to win her back, smiling harder, reaching, pointing, gesturing. When nothing works, the baby crumbles, looking away, distressed, shutting down. Watch it once and you understand the whole pattern. We are wired to perform for connection. Now imagine that still face wasn't a 2-minute experiment. Imagine it was a season of your childhood, a parent who was there, but not really there. Present in body, absent in attunement. This is childhood emotional neglect, and it's sneaky, because nothing dramatic happened. No bruises, no story to tell. Just a quiet, daily ache of reaching for someone and meeting a blank. A child can't say any of this, so instead they try harder, they get better at the smile. They become the chameleon. And the way a child adapts to that blank face becomes something deeper than a habit. It becomes a blueprint, a template for how closeness is supposed to feel. Psychologists call it your attachment style, the operating system you carry into every relationship after. If love was unpredictable, you learn to chase it. If love had conditions, you learn to perform. None of this was conscious. It settled into you before you had words, which raises a harder question. What exactly did that blueprint cost you? What it cost you was a voice, not the one you speak with, the one underneath, the one that knows what you like, what you want, what you won't tolerate. Somewhere along the way, that inner signal got turned down so low you stopped hearing it. So now, when someone asks your opinion, you instinctively wait. You float a soft, "What do you think?" and let their answer tell you yours. You're not being polite. You genuinely don't know yet. You learn to find yourself only in the mirror of other people. And living that way does something strange to your sense of self. You become fluent in everyone's needs and illiterate in your own. You can predict your friend's bad mood from one text, but you can't name what you're feeling at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. There's a low, constant hum of chronic guilt. Guilty for resting, guilty for wanting, guilty for taking up space you're sure you haven't earned. It's exhausting in a way you can't explain to people, because from the outside, you look like you're doing fine. Let's name what that exhaustion actually is. Your nervous system has been running threat detection software since childhood, and it never got the update that you're safe now. That's nervous system dysregulation, a body still bracing for a danger that ended years ago. So a delayed text reply spikes your stomach. A slightly off tone in a voice note hijacks your whole afternoon. You're not too sensitive. You're a smoke detector installed in a house that once caught fire, still screaming at the smell of toast. Go back one more time. Picture that child at the dinner table in the middle of a tense, quiet meal. 2 adults not speaking. The air thick. And watch the child. How still they go, how carefully they chew, how finely they read every micro shift in the room, ready to diffuse, distract, or disappear. That child is walking on eggshells in their own home. That isn't a kid being dramatic. That's a kid doing the emotional labor of a peacekeeper, in a body far too small for the job. And a child who keeps the peace for long enough grows into an adult who fears the rupture. This is where fear of conflict comes from, not cowardice, but memory. To that old part of you, disagreement doesn't feel like disagreement. It feels like the moment before everything broke. So you swallow the opinion. You change the subject when it heats up. You apologize to end the tension even when you did nothing wrong. Anything to stop the floor from shaking the way it used to. Let me tell you about one person who lived this. A man, let's just say, a man who grew up easy. The agreeable one. The kid teachers loved and parents bragged about because he never made a sound. He became the friend everyone leaned on, the partner who never asked for much, the colleague who stayed late without being asked. From the outside, a good life. At around 40, sitting alone in a quiet apartment, he realized he couldn't answer one question. What do I actually want? he'd never once asked. What broke him open wasn't a crisis. It was a small thing. A friend asked which movie he wanted to watch, and he heard himself say, automatically, "I don't mind, you pick." And for some reason, that night, the sentence echoed. I don't mind. He'd been saying it his whole life. About movies, jobs, cities, relationships. I don't mind. And he suddenly understood that I don't mind had quietly eaten every preference he'd ever almost had. He'd disappeared so slowly that even he hadn't noticed the vanishing. So he started doing something almost laughably small. Each day he'd ask himself one low-stakes question and force a real answer. Coffee or tea? Which do I actually want? Not which is easier, not which keeps the peace. Which do I want? The first week, the question made him weirdly anxious. By the third, something flickered back on. A faint, almost forgotten signal. The voice wasn't gone. It had just been waiting, patiently, in a room he'd stopped visiting. And you have that room too. You can try his practice tonight, and I gently suggest you do. Pick one tiny decision. What to eat, what to listen to, where to sit, and before you scan anyone else, pause and ask, what do I want here? Don't worry about getting it right. The point isn't the answer. The point is rebuilding a muscle that atrophied when you were young, the muscle of registering your own desire before outsourcing it to the room. It feels strange at first. That strangeness is the measure of how long it's been. Now here's something that might reframe the guilt you feel about all this. The people-pleasing, the approval-seeking, the constant editing of yourself to fit each room, none of it was manipulation. None of it was weakness. It was love, pointed in the only direction a child had. You were trying to stay close to the people you needed to survive, using the only tools available to someone with no power and no exit. And the strategy was flawless for the world you were in. The trouble is, you're not in that world anymore. And carrying an old survival strategy into a safe present has a cost nobody adds up for you. When you spend years reading everyone else, you slowly lose the thread of yourself. This is the quiet heart of self-abandonment. You become a stranger in your own life. You can sense the exact mood of a room in 3 seconds, but ask you to sit alone and feel your own, and there's static. The skill that once kept you safe is now the very thing keeping you from knowing who's actually in there. There's a particular loneliness in being the chameleon. You're surrounded by people who love you and quietly certain none of them have met you, because they've met the version tailored to them. The funny one, the calm one, the strong one. And love that lands on a performance never quite reaches the person underneath. It can't find them. So you can be adored and starving at the same time, applauded in a room and unseen in it. That gap between being liked and being known is the loneliest distance there is. Go back one final time to that child. But this time, don't watch them, sit with them. See the kid who got so good at reading everyone that they forgot to ask themselves anything. The kid who confused being needed with being loved, being good with being safe. They weren't broken. They were brilliant. They built exactly the self their world required, and that self carried you all the way here, to this moment, watching this. You owe that child something. Not criticism. Gratitude. They did the impossible with what they had. So let's give that child something they never got, a witness. Here's a practice, and it lands deeper than it sounds. Find a photo of yourself as a kid, 5, 6, 7. Look at the face, and say to them, out loud if you can, I see what you were doing. I see how hard you worked to keep everyone okay. You can stop now. I've got it from here. This is the beginning of reparenting, becoming, for yourself, the steady presence that was missing. It feels silly. Do it anyway. Because the most radical thing a former chameleon can do is start setting boundaries, and I mean the small, terrifying ones first. Saying, actually, I'd rather not. Letting a no stand without 17 reasons attached. Allowing someone to be a little disappointed in you and discovering, to your shock, that you survive it. The floor doesn't cave in. The love doesn't vanish. The catastrophe your nervous system predicted simply doesn't come. And each time it doesn't, an old prophecy loosens its grip on you, one small refusal at a time. There's grief in this work, and I won't pretend there isn't. Somewhere in here you'll feel angry at how early it started, at how much of your life was spent managing rooms instead of living in them. Let that anger come. It's a sign the silence part of you is finally speaking up for itself. Grief and anger aren't setbacks here. They're the inner child finally trusting you enough to show you the bill. Feel it. It's proof the numbness is thawing, that something frozen is starting to move. And as it thaws, you'll notice something quietly miraculous. The first time you state a real preference and the world doesn't end. The first time you let a silence sit instead of rushing to fill it with agreement. The first time you catch yourself mid-shapeshift, about to become whatever the room wants, and you choose, just slightly, to stay yourself instead. These moments are small, almost invisible. But each one is the inner child healing in real time, learning a truth they never got. I can be myself and still be safe. This is the slow, unglamorous return to self-worth, the kind that isn't earned by pleasing, because it was never supposed to be earned at all. You don't have to perform to deserve your place. You don't have to be useful to be allowed to stay. That's not how love is supposed to work, even if it's the only way you ever knew it. Real connection doesn't require you to vanish. And somewhere underneath all that adapting, the actual you, the one with opinions, edges, desires, has been waiting to be allowed back in. So picture it, a version of you that walks into a room and stays whole. Still warm, still kind, but no longer dissolving on contact. You can read the room and not obey it. You can sense someone's mood and not absorb it. That's the difference between the fawn response running you and you simply being thoughtful. One is fear in a costume. The other is choice. And the moment you can tell them apart inside yourself, the chameleon stops being your prison and becomes just one color you can choose. Finding your voice, it turns out, was never about getting louder. It was about getting honest, letting what's already inside you finally reach the surface without being filtered through everyone else's comfort first. The opinions were always there. The preferences, the wants, the quiet no's, all there, just buried under decades of reading the room. You're not building a new self from scratch. You're excavating the one that got covered over when you were small. And the deeper you dig, the clearer one thing becomes about who you've been all along. What becomes clear is this: the chameleon was never the real you. It was the costume the real you wore to get through. And costumes can come off. The version of you that adapts to survive and the version that exists freely, on its own terms, they were never the same person. One was a strategy. The other is who you actually are, underneath all that careful coloring. You spent so long becoming what each room needed that you never got to find out what you'd be in a room that simply let you stay. But you get to find out now. Not all at once. Nobody changes a lifelong reflex overnight. It happens in the pause before the automatic yes. In the preference you let yourself name. In the apology you swallow back because, for once, you did nothing wrong. Slowly, the scanning quiets. The colors settle. And you begin to live as someone with a center instead of just a surface. The child who learned to disappear spent years waiting for someone to finally notice they were there. That someone, it turns out, was always going to be you. So let me leave you with a few questions, and I want you to sit with them, not rush past them. When was the last time you knew, clearly, what you wanted before checking what everyone else wanted first? Who in your life has met the real you, not the version tailored to fit them? And that child you just sat with, the one who got so good at reading the room, what did they need that no one thought to give? You don't have to answer out loud, you just have to stop pretending you don't know. Here's something I'd love for you to do. In the comments, write one word, just one, for the child you used to be, not who you became to survive. Who you actually were underneath before you learned to disappear. Maybe it's curious. Maybe it's tender. Maybe it's a word you've never let yourself say. Whatever it is, leave it there. Someone scrolling by needs to see they're not the only one. And hear this clearly, because it's the whole point. You were never broken. You were never too much, never too sensitive, never too needy. You were a child who adapted, beautifully, to a world that asked you to shrink. And that adaptation kept you safe. Nothing in you needs fixing. It only needs to be seen, and allowed to come home. Thank you for staying to the end, for sitting with the hard parts instead of looking away. That took courage. You don't have to know what you want yet. You just have to stop saying, "I don't mind," when quietly you always did. And maybe as you start hearing your own voice again, a quieter question begins to surface, one this whole journey never quite answered. Because some of us didn't go silent from neglect. Some of us disappeared while being watched constantly, praised constantly, molded into the good one, the easy one, the child who never caused a problem. What if the obedience everyone admired was its own kind of wound? What if being the perfect child cost you the same self the chameleon did, just dressed in gold instead of fear? There's a room we haven't opened yet,